The Hermit Kingdom, a term you may or may not be familiar with describing the isolated nation of North Korea. Many aspects of the country remain mysterious. However, one aspect that never will is its formation. Korea was under control of Japan, but an Axis loss in the Second World War led to the surrender of the country to Allied powers. Global superpowers with different political ideologies, of course, don't share well, so a split 38 degrees north of the equator was imminent, hence the North and South Korea we know today. In a society so liberal as ours, understanding a nation as totalitarian as the Hermit Kingdom is arduous, and with misunderstanding comes stigma. In this video, the country's defining history, ideology, and global disturbances will be explored to encompass the perplexing politics of North Korea. First, some foundational information about North Korea. The country's official name is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK for short, and is based on the eastern side of Asia. According to the World Bank, the population currently stands at 25.97 million people. Geographically, North Korea is bordered by China and Russia to its north, and South Korea to its south, with its capital city Pyongyang being based near the west coast and acting as a major industrial and transport centre. Ethnically speaking, the country lacks diversity, as it only has two ethnic groups, one being a dominant 99.8% Korean and the other being a minuscule 0.2% Chinese, according to the Encyclopedia of Britannica. To fully understand the country as it is today, an analysis of its history is necessary. An important influence upon North Korea's formation is the control of Japan. In 1910, Japan officially claimed the nation of Korea, unsplit at the time, which it had already occupied for 5 years previously. Brutal repression was a common experience for Koreans. For example, during Japan's modernization of Korea's economy by building nationwide infrastructure such as roads, railroads, and implementing electrical power, forced labour was the most prevalent means to achieve this goal. Furthermore, in 1919, nationwide anti-Japanese rallies were met with violent suppression, leading to the deaths of tens of thousands. However, this only strengthened resolve. Korean provisional governments were set up, which participated in armed combat with Japanese military throughout the 1920s, but this only worsened conditions for the Korean citizens. Two resulting measures imposed were a strict military rule and forced conversion to Japanese cultural and spiritual practices. To the Japanese government, Koreans were seen as pawns to be used when necessary, and this was especially true with the outbreak of World War II. Koreans were drafted to fight for Japan, and were forced to work in mines, factories and military bases for little or no pay. Korean women weren't exempt from forced labour, being used as comfort women, that performed sexual services for the Japanese military. With conditions worsening, 1941 saw war break out between Korea's self-made governments, with assistance of allied Chinese powers, and Japan, but fortunately, with the concluding Axis loss of the Second World War, Japanese colonial rule ended in August of 1945. Now, was the Japanese occupation all bad? On the one hand, Japan built the foundations of the infrastructure used in both the Koreas, which have been built upon, leading to economic growth through the years. Also, the implementation of road systems allowed for more efficient transport between cities, which for example made the movement of resources during World War II more streamlined. On the other hand, the occupation was never sustainable, as the development of new infrastructure was based upon forced labour, meaning the livelihoods of Koreans never improved and they stayed impoverished. The proof of unsustainability was the previously discussed frequent revolts of Korean provisional governments that the Japanese had to combat with increased military spending. Furthermore, the conditions for women were appalling, as sexual abuse was a norm. Overall, the only positive aspect of the Japanese occupation was that it helped both Koreas to develop financially, otherwise it was detrimental to Korean culture and the free will of citizens. In 1943, two conferences were held in Cairo involving the following Allied powers: the United Kingdom, United States and China. The desired goal of the first conference was to strip Japan of all the territories it had seized since 1914, therefore restoring Korea to independence. A four-power trusteeship over Korea, also including Russia, was discussed, but never formally agreed upon. The USSR proposed to American military leaders the idea of simply invading Korea. However, the US stated it wouldn't be possible unless soldiers had first landed in the Japanese mainland. On August 9, 1945, Russian troops moved south into the territory of Manchuria, which was a territory of China occupied by Japan at the time. Russian forces then moved into North Korea. American invasion in southern Korea proceeded a month later as a result of General Order No. 1, which declared that the Japanese forces north of latitude 38 degrees commonly called the 38th parallel, would surrender to the USSR and forces south to the US. The Korean War is considered a proxy war by historians, which means it was a subtle way for Russia and the US to indirectly fight one another during the Cold War. The war began in 1950 because of a North Korean invasion into the south, headed by Kim Il-sung, who will be discussed later in this video. Contrary to today's situation, North Korea had a huge advantage, having been given large quantities of economic funding as well as weaponry by the USSR and China. South Korea was seriously under-equipped. For example, the US, which supported them at the time, refused to give them any tanks in the case of warfare. Furthermore, only 500 US troops remained to help form the South Korean military. The 38th parallel was crossed by northern forces and had South Korea cornered in the southeast. However, whilst North Korean forces resupplied their front line, the Southern Navy forces flanked them, moving to the west and recapturing the city of Seoul, which is now the South Korean capital. The northern forces were pushed back towards China, but Chinese troops, who were previously uninvolved, marched the southern forces back to the 38th parallel. Control of the peninsula fluctuated, with an eventual armistice creating an international border. However, a peace treaty was never signed, therefore the war has not officially ended. It's estimated that 3 million casualties occurred as a consequence of the war, and tensions still exist between both Koreas today, the two biggest examples being threats of nuclear annihilation and the recent launches of satellites from both powers in order to spy on one another's military. By speaking to expert in politics and history Paul Widowson, an insight into why Russia and America involved themselves so heavily in proxy wars can be ascertained. Paul Widowson states, "Major powers such as the USA, Russia and China seek to have countries around them to either be friendly to them and in their sphere of influence, called a satellite state, or a country genuinely unaligned and not hostile to them, called a buffer state, as part of a theory of the balance of power. Being a satellite or buffer state can be dangerous because if a major power believes that the satellite or buffer state is or could become hostile to them, they will often take action to stop the hostility, whilst another major power may wish to help defend the threatened satellite or buffer state. If this happens, war can break out between the major powers in the satellite or buffer states. North Korea are now close allies with China, and it could be argued that North Korea is a satellite/buffer state for China, whilst South Korea is a buffer state for the USA. These facts explain the USA, Russia and China's heavy involvement in the Korean War. Another important aspect of Korea's history is the introduction of the Kim dynasty, which began with the installation of Prime Minister Kim Il-sung in 1948. Sung was born in the village of Mangyeondae, which is near Pyongyang. According to his self-written memoirs, he joined a communist youth organisation at the age of 6, which led to his arrest towards the end of the 1930s. After his release, Sung joined an anti-Japanese guerrilla warfare group, which Soviet authorities noticed, leading to him receiving political and military training. After Japan's surrender in 1945, Sung and fellow Soviet-trained Koreans created a provisional government with the communist ideology in what was then just the northern part of Korea. Significant promotions ensued, as in 1948 he became Prime Minister of the newly formed Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and in 1949 became Chairman of the Korean Workers' Party, which still rules to this day. Sung's most significant action as leader was most definitely the invasion of South Korea, as this caused the previously discussed Korean War. After the Korean War, Sung introduced the Juche Ideology, which will be discussed later in this video, as a means to help North Korea develop its economy. The economy boomed in the 50s and 60s, however stagnated in the 90s, especially with food shortages. Sung's rule came to an end in 1994 due to a sudden fatal heart attack, so logically, power was passed down to his son, Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il was born in the USSR in 1941, however North Korean accounts say different. According to North Korean history, he was born at a base camp on Mount Paigtu, which is the highest point of the Korean peninsula, and a double rainbow appeared in the sky. His influence over the nation began in 1967 with his assistance in North Korea's party purge started by his father, which led to the murder of 17 senior officials. Following on from this, in 1973, he was appointed secretary of the Korean Workers' Party. His father designated him as successor in 1980, and with Kim Il-sung's death in 1994, Il inherited power. Kim Jong-il's strongest influence over the country was in art and media, having headed a film studio before his rise to power. His work encouraged socialist values, with the main purpose being to improve international opinion regarding North Korea's ruling party. However, the means to produce these films were rather unethical. To develop North Korea's film industry, Il ordered the abduction of South Korean film director Shin Sang-ok and his wife, actress Choi Eun-hee, from Hong Kong. Il acted as executive producer on these films, with the most well-known being Pulgasari, a film with undeniable inspirations from the Japanese Godzilla. In terms of economics, Il was put in a tough position following the struggling economy left by his father, so to combat this, Il sought to mend ties with a plethora of countries. To mend ties with America, North Korea agreed to dismantle its nuclear weapons program in order to receive nuclear reactors capable of producing electricity for the country. This deal fell apart with Il announcing the development of nuclear weapons in 2003, which remains the focus of conflict between the US and North Korea today. In 2008, it became clear that Il's health was deteriorating, accompanied by speculations of him suffering a stroke. It was announced on the 19th of December 2011 that Il had passed away, and his designated successor was his youngest son, Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is the current leader of North Korea and was born in the capital, Pyongyang. However, his birth date remains a mystery. North Korean sources claim the date to be the 8th of January 1982. However, American sources claim it to be in the year 1984 instead. This demonstrates an interesting part of Kim Jong-un's character, that being his element of mystery. He was reportedly educated in Switzerland and later attended the Kim Il-sung National War College in Pyongyang from 2002 to 2007. He was the youngest of Kim Jong-il's 3 children, and despite being the youngest, he was seen to be the only son fit for taking power. He was listed as a candidate for the Supreme People's Assembly in 2009, which is the highest post of power in North Korean politics, and was given a post on the powerful National Defense Commission, which is an institution for military and defense. Un, at this time, was referred to as brilliant comrade, making his position as successor clear. When his father Kim Jong-il passed away, Un was declared the supreme leader unofficially, meaning he had both control of the government and military. His status as leader was officially marked in 2012 by the acquisition of titles such as Secretary of the Korean Workers' Party, Chairman of the Central Military Commission, Chairman of the NDC, and many more. Kim Jong-un's strongest influence over the country so far has been the escalation of North Korea's nuclear weapons program, which has been a constant threat to sworn enemies of the state. For example, at the beginning of 2023, Un vowed to exponentially increase the production of nuclear warheads as a result of deepening animosity against the US, Japan, and South Korea, which Un named North Korea's undoubted enemy. The nation increased nuclear weapons testing in 2006, and by 2017 had carried out 6 tests, with 1 nuke that was small enough to be mounted to an intercontinental ballistic missile. As a result, powerful countries such as the USA have reacted with equal animosity, demonstrated by Biden's quote during a press conference with the current South Korean president. A nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies, or partners, is unacceptable, and will result in the end of whatever regime to take such an action. Another staple of Kim Jong-un's rule has been a rampant increase in assassinations and executions, predominantly due to political disagreements. In 2013, the current leader's uncle, Jang Song-teik, was executed for supposedly conspiring to overthrow the North Korean regime. This is just one example of Kim Jong-un's paranoia-based murder spree. However, this will be discussed in more detail later in this video. Now, a question you may ask is who the most influential leader of North Korea has been, but this is a difficult question to answer due to the leaders making such different developments. Only one leader, that being Kim Il-sung, experienced warfare, and Paul Widdowson speaks on this. It could be argued that war mixes up people from different classes or sections of society in a common cause which perhaps brings a greater understanding, solidarity and respect of each other, leading to perhaps better policy and political decisions if those people later go on into politics. This tells us that ideally, a prospective leader with warfare experience, i.e. Kim Il-sung, would be more compassionate towards civilians with their political ideals. However, this is far from the truth. For example, Sung's rule utilised deadly prison camps to repress backlash to his regime, which is still used to this day, but on the other hand, the founding of North Korea can be credited to him, as well as rebuilding the country after the devastating effects of the Korean War. Kim Jong-il's rule led to artistic advancements with the introduction of the North Korean film industry, however worsened relations with the West by being unfaithful to agreements made concerning nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un's rule is still ongoing as of 2024, but has made significant advancements in nuclear weapons, which may seem bad to Western viewers, however to a North Korean citizen would invoke a sense of protection. On the other hand, his rule has endured many famines which have led to the deaths of thousands. Overall, I believe the most revolutionary leader was Kim Il-sung, as his influence is still prevalent in modern North Korean society today, with the Juche Ideology. Juche is the state-implemented ideology of North Korea. Translated from Korean, it means self-reliance and relates to the country's political, economic and military affairs. It can be described as a mix of mainly two different philosophies, which I'll detail now. Much of the language used within the ideology lends itself to Marxism, developed by philosopher Karl Marx in Germany, and it is the belief that every person within a society works for a common good, and that socio-economic classes are irrelevant. The other philosophy prevalent within Juche is Confucianism, developed by philosopher Confucius in ancient China, and it is the belief that a society can live in cosmic harmony if the members act with an upstanding moral character. By adopting these trains of thought, North Korea could appear autonomous, as their ideals lean neither in the favour of China or the Soviet Union, both of which were aiding the struggling nation at the time. The Juche ideology was founded by Kim Il-sung, and the World Atlas claims that the main purpose of its implementation was to create blind support in the Korean military, which helped to suppress any backlash to Kim Il-sung's controversial rise to power. Although it relates to many aspects of the country, the idea was most significant during the 1960s, post-Korean War, whilst rebuilding North Korean infrastructure. An example of the nation's self-reliance is the improvement of agricultural land and irrigation systems to increase grain production and meet the pent-up demand for food. However, the prevalence of the Juche ideology in North Korean politics has been used as a cunning strategy for the Kim dynasty to create impetuous support within their society. For example, weddings must take place in front of a statue of Kim Il-sung. In fact, there are a few other ridiculous examples of unquestioned achievements that the Kim dynasty enforced their responsibility for. According to the Vox News network, it is an official belief within the country that Kim Jong-il invented the hamburger, which is sophisticatedly named double bread with meat. Also, the government claims to have developed a drug that is able to cure both AIDS and Ebola. These achievements may seem ridiculous to Western outsiders. However, due to the one-sided nature of North Korean indoctrination, it's understandable that citizens do not question these bold claims. An expert of North Korea at the University of Southern California, David Kang, talks on this. Of course they believe it. I always object to putting in terms such as brainwashing, because every society has rituals and cultures and norms and values. When they're very clear and everyone else is doing them, you just do it too. This quote here explains effectively how easily ideas can be believed when societies are programmed to have certain norms, and this isn't only prevalent in totalitarian states like the Hermit Kingdom. Religious Western countries are also guilty of this, as children raised in religious families may never question the beliefs bestowed upon them. To further explain the blind support, one Confucian doctrine implies that human beings can transform the world if they possess the correct mindset. The Juche ideology adapts this belief to demonstrate that the only correct consciousness is the Seryong, meaning leader of North Korea, so naturally one's life would drastically improve by aligning themselves with the uniquely gifted head of state. This gave the Kim dynasty a godlike status, further backed by the claims that Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il possess meteorokinetic abilities, meaning they can control the weather. Citizens have no way of knowing that their state religion isn't supported by facts, because information is only shared through state-run media. One may question the ideology's weight within North Korean society. On the one hand, the Juche ideology can easily be observed through North Korea's military spending. According to First Post News Network, North Korea has spent approximately $4 billion on its military between 2009 to 2019. This may not sound like a large amount of money, but according to the Trading Economics website, North Korea's gross domestic product was worth $18 billion in 2019, meaning just over 20% of the country's earnings were invested in its military. This clearly demonstrates the nation's desire to be strong in terms of manpower, hence the country can rely on itself for protection. On the other hand, the principles of self-reliance were largely disbanded, with this being observable through the fall of the Soviet Union. The USSR fell in 1991, which meant North Korea had lost its primary source of food aid. This in itself denotes a lack of self-reliability. However, Kim Jong-il's response at the time was to create a military-first initiative that prioritised the health of soldiers before ordinary citizens. The nationwide famine that ensued proved that the nation could by no means function with its own resources. Famines are still prominent in North Korean society, with the most recent occurring during the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, the Juche ideology's ideals were rarely evident in the country, and it mainly served as a means for the Kim dynasty to inconspicuously keep control of North Korean society. North Korea's nuclear capability is its most controversial aspect, commonly discussed on many Western news networks, as well as being a cause of worldwide panic. Their nuclear program started off as a topic of discussion between communist nations at the beginning of the Korean War, with Joseph Stalin supposedly telling Kim Il-sung to strike the Southerners in their teeth. In 1963, then President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, proposed a global nuclear test ban treaty in order to slow the problematic nuclear arms race. and it was reported in 1963 by Time newspaper that North Korea was one of the only countries to announce their reluctance to signing the treaty. During the escalation of the Vietnam War, North Korea were disinclined to rely on Soviet or Chinese support, perhaps in correlation with the prominent Juche ideology. With Kim Il-sung's death, which was mentioned earlier in the video, of course his son, Kim Jong-il, rose to power, and he had a much greater interest in nuclear weapons. In 2002, the United States suspected that the Hermit Kingdom had been enriching uranium, which is a process where the proportion of uranium-235 is increased within a sample due to its better facility. North Korea's nuclear testing has remained a consistent talking point through the start of the 21st century, starting with the country's announcement of an underground nuclear test in 2006. Further tests occurred in the last years of Il's life. A large part of Kim Jong-un's rule has been furthering the development of nuclear weapons, the latest of which in 2024 being a test of a cruise missile with the quoted super-large warhead. Un, however, has been on the fence about eliminating the country's nuclear arsenal in the past. On the one hand, Un has been open to ending nuclear weapons development as a means to achieve another nation's aid. For example, Un made his proposition with the intention of attaining security from the United States, which led to the monumental summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. On the other hand, Un has tightly protected the development by assassinating members of the North Korean government that oppose it. More on this later in the video. The United States has been extremely opposed to the idea of North Korea being a nuclear state due to the country's aggressive nature in political affairs. But does North Korea deserve to have nuclear weapons at all? The answer is both a yes and a no, and it links to the Juche ideology, which Paul Widdowson explains perfectly. North Korea is a sovereign nation, and if the nation wishes to develop nuclear weapons and has the financial and political will to do so, then it has the right to do so, unless it enters a treaty with other nations restricting itself in nuclear weapons development and the holding of such weapons. North Korea holds such weapons as it is self-reliant, and its government believes that North Korea needs nuclear weapons. Basically, each nation deserves to be equal in terms of what technology they wish to develop, and it is extremely unfair for a country such as America to encourage smaller nations to halt nuclear weapons development with the underlying goal of preserving their global power and influence. This interference also increases the chances of nuclear warfare occurring, as the smaller nation may feel a sense of antagonism due to the differences between how the nations operate politically, therefore creating a divide between dissimilar political ideologies. Opposingly, people claim that from a self-preserving perspective, North Korea shouldn't possess nuclear weapons, as they cannot be trusted to use them appropriately. As mentioned earlier in the video, North Korea is notorious for breaking agreements which intend to halt their nuclear program's development. This in turn makes North Korea seem untrustworthy and unpredictable, and therefore extremely dangerous. It is extremely rational to fear potential nuclear warfare, as Kim Jong-un has told the Western world not to underestimate his willingness to use destructive weapons, and the resulting death toll would be in the millions, as just one of North Korea's nukes could destroy the entirety of the United States capital, Washington DC, which would immediately kill 700,000 people. To conclude this argument, whether people are opposed to North Korea's arsenal of nuclear weapons is irrelevant, as the nation is not currently under any treaty to halt their development. Therefore, North Korea deserves to reserve their right to weapons of mass destruction, just like any other country. The most sinister aspect of the isolated nation is how it deals with people that disobey the stringent order of the regime. Since the regime's formation in the mid-20th century, North Korea hasn't been hesitant to assassinate people that stand as obstacles to the success of their political system, a great example being the so-called Raid on the Blue House in 1968. It involved 31 North Korean military elite entering South Korea, and the goal of this endeavour was to assassinate then South Korean President Park Chung-hee, but the mission was unsuccessful and only one of the 31 soldiers returned home. The attempt was motivated by conflict at the demilitarized zone, which North Korea hoped to quell by disordering the South's government. This story here proves the willingness of North Korea to use assassinations as a means to fight conflicts or neutralize any threats to the longevity of the Kim dynasty. The most prevalent example in very recent history was the assassination of Kim Jong-nam in 2017. Nam was the half-brother of Kim Jong-un and influenced the country by helping to establish the closed-off computer system used within North Korea, which is ironic in contrast to the opinions he held over the nation's freedom. He believed that the nation needed to be governed more liberally, which posed him as a threat to the regime considering he was a member of the Kim family, and hence had some level of influence in North Korean politics. On the 13th of February, whilst loitering the Malaysian Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Nam was smothered with a cloth covered in nerve agent. He died 20 minutes later. His death is significant to North Korean citizens, as it demonstrates the mercilessness of Kim Jong-un, as he is willing to kill even family members if they in any way pose a threat to his regime. The same can therefore be said for citizens, and this can be observed in videos of Kim Jong-un's processions where they excessively cheer for their leader. I speculate there could in fact be two main reasons for this, as on the one hand, as we know, North Koreans are made to believe that figures of the Kim dynasty are in fact godlike individuals, therefore deserving of intense worship, but on the other hand, the reasoning could simply be a fear of looking disobedient to the regime. The punishment for treachery in North Korea is arguably a much worse fate than that met by Kim Jong-nam. Labour camps are the primary means of punishment for disobedience, and they involve dangerous unpaid labour in agriculture and mining. According to escapees, the most common reasons for incarcerations were attempting to go to South Korea, religious activity, or criticism of the state. The conditions of these camps are shocking, and prisoners are known to face beatings as a form of torture. Two former detainees described their experiences in labour camps to the UN's Human Rights Office, with one anonymous woman claiming she was beaten with firewood where, quote, "the skin on my face tore open, my chin became dislocated, and 4 of my teeth were knocked out," and another woman claimed her and other prisoners were forced into animal-like labour, where they, quote, "dragged the cart that cows normally pull." What makes these camps even more frightening is the idea of family responsibility that permeates through the North Korean justice system. Citizens themselves are not only found guilty, but their close family and descendants too. North Korean defector Kang Chol-hwan spent 10 years at the Yodok concentration camp and spoke on his experiences to the independent news network. Kang's family criticised the creation of the Kim dynasty, which they believed was not in line with communist principles, which led to the following 2 generations of the family being incarcerated. The most horrific event Kang describes is public hangings, but adds some descriptive detail. It was not only the hanging itself, but the fact that the guards forced prisoners to throw rocks at the body and left it hanging there for a week until the birds had pecked at it, so much it was beyond recognition. North Korean camps can be compared to the concentration camps used by the Nazis, but why aren't they discussed nearly as much? The answer is simple, and it's because very few people lived to escape the North Korean camps and speak on the crimes against humanity carried out. Furthermore, in World War II, Allied forces were able to restore documents after liberating German camps, which gave a plethora of information on the atrocities that took place, whereas the only evidence for North Korean labour camps is anecdotal. Despite being one of the most secretive countries in the world, the complex and enigmatic information that the Western world has amassed on North Korea has offered a glimpse into a nation which is decades behind the rest of the world in terms of political and technological advancements. The perplexing so-called democratic system, contrasted with the abhorrent methods to suppress the regime's criticism, marks a strong hypocrisy that demonstrates its fear of losing control of its people. The self-reliance of the nation has led to the leaders of the hermit kingdom being ignorant to making necessary changes that ensure the regime's long-term sustainability, which is the main reason why North Korea will never change.